Welcome everyone to Hub Entertainment's live webinar, A Drone is Not a Toy. My name is Christy Matul and I'm a Managing Director at Hub Entertainment, specializing in insurance and risk services for film, television, and internet production companies. We'd like to start with some housekeeping notes. On the audio, you can use your computer's microphone and speakers, or there's a toll-free number to call into with an access code that you can also access the audio. We're going to do question and answers, but please use the chat box to ask questions and we will review them at the end. And if we run out of time, we will respond to your questions by email. We're recording this webinar and it will be available to download from our website, www.hubentertainment.com, shortly. We put together this webinar to help clarify the many misconceptions there are in the entertainment industry about the do's and don'ts of drone use, and specifically what liabilities you may face if you're not following regulations and best practices. This is a 90-minute webinar in two parts. The first 50 minutes will be focused on aerial filming in film and TV production. Then we'll take a quick 10-minute intermission, and finally we'll spend the remaining 30 minutes on music and live events. I'd like to introduce our speaker today, Jonathan Rupprecht, who is a drone and a commercial pilot. He's also an airplane flight instructor and instrument flight instructor. He is an expert on aviation law, and we are delighted to have him here today to shed some light on this emerging issue. Jonathan, take it away.
All right, thank you so much for letting me be able to speak on this topic. It's so apropos because everyone's asking about what can we do with drones. Now let's talk briefly, just my background before we head into the rest of these slides. My background is that I am an aviation attorney that focuses specifically on aviation law and drone law. I'm a commercial pilot. I have a commercial pilot certificate for a multi-engine as well as single-engine land aircraft. I have 2 flight instructor certificates that are currently still current. I went to Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University and went to Florida International University for my JD. I wrote a book on drone law, and it's called Drones and Many Civilian Uses in the U.S. Laws Surrounding Them. I also co-authored another book that is currently being published by the American Bar Association called Unmanned Aircraft and the National Airspace, Critical Issues, Technology, and the Law. I'm a member of the Society of Aerial Cinematographers, and as of December the 31st, my firm was ranked 2nd in the U.S. with a number of 333 client exemptions. So, how do people commercially operate drones in the United States? Well, the FAA does allow commercial drone operations if the operator has a Section 333 exemption and that individual, that operator, complies with those restrictions. Now you're going to ask, why does a drone operator actually need to get this exemption? Well, the FAA as well as the NTSB both believe that drones are considered aircraft, and therefore they are subject to all the federal aviation regulations. Some of these federal aviation regulations are burdensome to actually comply with, so therefore you need an exemption from those burdensome regulations. Now let me give you an example of what would be a burdensome regulation in the federal aviation regulations. 91-119. This is what it looks graphically. On the left-hand side there, you see if you are operating an aircraft in a sparsely populated area, you are to remain 500 feet away from whatever you don't own. If you're in open water, it's 500 feet also. If you're in a rural environment, then you have to maintain 500 feet above the ground altitude. And if you are in a congested environment, you must maintain 1,000 feet above the highest obstacle and 2,000 feet horizontally. Now, if you were flying your drone under the federal aviation regulations strictly, it's going to be kind of hard to get your nice, cinematography shots if you're having to stay 500 feet away. I mean, what type of lens are you going to need for that? And can the drone even carry that type of lens? It's going to be very difficult. So you're going to need an exemption from that regulation as well as many more. Now, Section 333 of the FAA Modernization and Reform Act of 2012 is what most people look to when they try to understand more about this area. Now, Section 333 is not yet codified in the United States Code. Some of the bills that are currently pending for the FAA reauthorization in Congress right now are currently trying to codify those in certain parts of Title 49 of the United States Code, but currently it's not codified anywhere in the United States Code. You're going to have to go look up Section 333, specifically section 331 through 336. It talks about drones, and that's where you're going to want to read. Now, to say a section 333 exemption is a misnomer. Why? Section 333 does not provide any exemption powers. It allows the FAA to determine whether a certificate of waiver, a certificate of authorization, or an airworthiness certificate will be required. Well, how does that work? Section 333 allows the FAA to determine if you need an airworthiness certificate or not. So if they say, hey, your Phantom does not need an airworthiness certificate, therefore many of the regulations that require the operator to maintain airworthiness go out the door because there is no airworthiness certificate to maintain. Then there are 3 regulations which are taken care of under a certificate of authorization or waiver. It's really a waiver is what you're getting in the industry. And this is another misnomer as well. You're not getting a COA, you're not getting an authorization, you're actually getting a CAL, a certificate of waiver for 3 specific regulations. And then the remaining regulations are taken care of under the exemption process in Part 11. And what Part 11 is designed to do is you identify the burdensome regulations that you are going to have a hard time complying with, and then you propose to the FAA alternative restrictions to comply with that have an equivalent level of safety as the federal aviation regulations. So kind of understand it like a legal teeter-totter, if you will. It has to be safe, or if not safer than the federal aviation regulations. Now what's also interesting is Section 333 comes from the FAA Modernization Reform Act of 2012. The COA process individuals are currently using actually came from the 1980s following the Twilight Zone movie crash. And the Motion Picture Association of America worked with the FAA to develop a standardized manual, which then if you present that to the FAA and they accept it, you are waived from the 500-foot restriction to now be able to film actors within 500 feet of them. And then lastly, the part exemption process, that's been around for decades. So if you will, this whole thing is a legal cocktail. You have different aged pieces of liquor and stuff all put in and mixed up. And then that's how you can legally fly under the federal aviation regulations. Now, what does a Section 333 exemption say? It specifically lists out who is the operator. Is this an individual or is this a person? And it also specifically says what regulations the operator is being exempted from. Because remember, all of the federal aviation regulations apply. The burdensome ones are specifically listed. You don't have to comply with this one, this one, this one, this one. All the rest are still on the table you have to comply with, but then you operate in lieu of those regulations. And also specifically lists what the restrictions are to comply with instead of the specifically exempted regulations. Now, it also says what type of operations the operator is approved for. And probably about 99% of all the exemptions out there fall into these 2 categories. You have aerial data collection operations, and then you have closed-set TV movie filming operations. Aerial data collection is defined as any remote sensing and measuring by an instrument aboard an unmanned aircraft. I mean, that is super broad. So it's a sensor on an aircraft gathering data. Done. So you got LiDAR, cinematography, if you're going to do roof inspections, utility, all of that is included in there. Now, why would an individual need to do this closed-set TV movie filming? It's to get around the 500-foot restriction. So individuals wanting to fall in the first category, aerial data collection, do not need a motion picture manual. Remember that whole thing back from the 1980s developed post the Twilight Zone movie crash? They don't need the motion picture manual because they're not going to be getting near people. But if you're wanting to film near people, you're going to need a motion picture and TV operating manual, and you're going to need to submit that to the FAA. They look it over, they approve it, and then you operate under that manual and your exemption. Also, a brief thing I just wanted to mention is that after you get your 333 exemption, actually concurrently, the FAA also grants you a blanket COA, a blanket COA, which has also other restrictions in it. And so you operate under both of those documents at the same exact time. Now, what are the restrictions in a 333 exemption? you have 100 mile per hour max speed. You can only go 400 feet above the ground. Okay, now that's an important point. Above the ground, not get on top of a building and somehow call that ground, and so we get up even higher. No, it's the ground, not top of a building. In the drone must be maintained line of sight only, and you're going to need a visual observer. Now, if you look on the right-hand side there, you see these set of eyeballs, and that's the best way to understand this whole setup. You got eyeballs on the drone. You have the visual observer's eyeballs on the sky, as well as the surrounding area to make sure people that are non-participants are not coming within 500 feet of the drone, or cars, or there's some type of problem or emergency that's unforeseen. He's looking around everywhere else. And then if you are going to be doing cinematography of some sort, you're going to need a third individual who's going to be the gimbal operator looking at the screen, because the cameraman's got to have his eyeballs on the drone and the visual observer's got to have his eyeballs on the sky. So how are they going to be getting that sweet shot? They can't. Now, you can kind of understand where the camera's pointed, and you can kind of just record without looking down. You can do that, and some people get away with a minimum of a 2-person operation, but primarily in cinematography, it's going to be a 3-person operation based upon the kind of this eyeball understanding. Eyeballs on the drone, eyeballs on the sky. Now, the pilot in command of the aircraft, he must have at a minimum an FAA Sport Pilot Certificate and a valid driver's license. He could also have, instead of the driver's license, a 3rd class medical exam, but it's a driver's license or medical certificate. Now, the Sport Pilot Certificate, one interesting point there is that there are many categories and classes of aircraft that you can get your Sport Pilot Certificate in. So you could do it in an airplane, a helicopter, a glider, a powered parachute, an airship, a balloon, and all of those are completely valid ways to do it. So some individuals are actually going and getting their hot air balloon sport pilot certificates. And what's interesting is that there are different hour requirements for each of those and different characteristics. So for a balloon, it's 7 hours, but for an airplane, it's 20 hours of flight experience. Now, another restriction on the 333 is that you are not allowed to fly at night. Now, night under the Federal Aviation Regulations is going to be defined as starting at civil sunset and then ends at civil twilight. That generally roughly translates to about 20 minutes or so after the normal sunset, generally around there. You have to look it up in the Airman's Almanac to actually find the exact time for your location. Now, another restriction is you cannot operate within 5 miles of an airport unless a letter of agreement and otherwise permitted by a COA, Certificate of Authorization, issued to the exemption holder. Now, remember, you can operate closer to an airport, but there's extra hoops you have to go through to do that. You can't just do it right off the bat with a 333 and a blanket COA. You're going to have to do some extra hoop jumping. Now, the weather, you have to have at least be able to maintain 500 feet below the clouds. So that means at that point, you're going to have the clouds at least 700 feet or higher above the ground. And you have to maintain at least 2,000 feet horizontal from the clouds and have 3 statute miles of visibility. All the operations shall be conducted over private or controlled access property with permission from the property owner, controller, or authorized representative. Now, in addition to those restrictions, you have to complete the mission with 5 minutes of battery reserve. This becomes problematic for the cinematography guys because, well, the smaller aircraft, you can get a pretty good amount of time on them. So, I mean, let's say you have 20 minutes and you have a 5-minute reserve. You have 15 minutes of operational time to get your shots with like a Phantom 3, for instance. But if you're doing a free fly Alta, lifting a red, you're going to have around 8 minutes of flight time. That's kind of problematic because under the regulations, under the exemption, you basically have about 3 minutes now. Early on when the restrictions were being given out, the reserve for battery was originally 25% battery reserve, and then it went to 30%, and then it changed to 5 minutes. So it got easier to calculate for some of the other individuals that weren't flying cinematography. For the cinematography guys, they didn't really get a good deal there. So that's something to keep in mind. Now, the aircraft must be registered and marked as best as possible, and the drone cannot be operated by the pilot in command from any moving vehicle. Operations must be conducted at least 500 feet from all non-participating persons, vessels, vehicles, and structures unless they are protected, or if you get for vessels and vehicles and structures, you can get permission from the owner, that's fine, but primarily for the people, they're going to either be protected or participating. Now going back to this 500-foot restriction and 91-119, if you look at the bottom left-hand side there, so that individual right there, if he had a section 3 through 3 exemption, he would be operating, doing like aerial data collection. He has to stay away from the people. Well, if you want to get closer to the individuals and get some pictures of them, then you're going to need to get the closed set TV movie filming. This is another good way to understand all the distances and the heights and everything. So if this individual has only aerial data collection, he has to stay 500 feet away from the filming. Okay, that's the blue line there. And then for the orange line right there, you see that's the blanket COA's maximum altitude. The exemption height's maximum altitude is at 400 feet. So how does that work? Well, you get both of those documents. You're going to operate under the more restrictive of the two restrictions. So generally everybody is limited to only 200 feet. You can apply for another COA from the FAA if you need to go up to 400 feet. And word on the street is that the FAA will start issuing out blanket COAs here coming up that will go all the way up to 400 feet because they were having a pretty good backlog of people requesting to go up to 400 feet to get certain types of shots and stuff like that. So that's the best way to understand it. Most people operate in that, where the drone is right now, they operate in that zone, probably about 90% of everybody that's approved in the US. So when we talk here coming up about vetting, 90% fall into that little box right there. Only the people that approve for closed set can get closer, and the people that have special COAs can go up to the red line. Let's talk about some myths that put production companies at risk. One myth is that the drone company I'm hiring has insurance. I don't need any insurance. I'm just going back to that. I don't need no stinking insurance, right? Many people think that, and they put it on the drone company to pay the premiums for that. Well, if you are a production company, I want you to think about this. Two examples. One, drone takes off, crashes into the cameraman. Okay, the damage might not be so bad, but the cameraman is most likely going to say, hey, you did some type of negligent hiring. Okay, then you're going to be named as a co-defendant. Well, with a drone injury that's not super severe, it's not going to exceed the limits of liability that most drone companies have. But let's say under the situation where drone company, flies the drone, it takes off and it crashes into the lead actor, well, that's a big problem, especially if it hits the dude in the face. That's probably going to exceed the limits of liability on their policy, and then you're going to be named as a co-defendant. You might want to consider seriously having your own insurance policy covering you. That insurance policy is covering the drone company. Why don't you do the same thing and cover you? Because especially if you have deep pockets, a personal injury attorney is going to go, oh, let's go after the production company as well. So you need to put up some barriers to protect you as well. Don't rely on the drone company alone. Myth number 2, my general liability insurance policy will cover any drone accidents or problems. Well, big problem with this. Drones are considered aircraft. Okay, and if you look at the Code of Federal Regulations, it says aircraft means a device that is used or intended to be used in the used for flight in the air. The FAA and the NTSB both hold this view. Now, drones are considered aircraft, therefore most insurance policies specifically exclude aircraft from their policies. Now, what's the solution to this? Talk to your insurance broker about getting coverage to protect for these aircraft type of accidents. Myth number 3, the drone company has a 3 through 3. Everything's fine. Well, you're basically setting yourself up for a negligent hiring lawsuit if there is a lawsuit. Well, why negligent hiring? Well, let me ask you, when you hire somebody, do you do any type of vetting of that individual to make sure they're competent to actually do the type of work that you're hiring them to do? Did you, let's say you were going to hire a 333 company, did you ask them if they were approved for closed set? Have you seen their motion picture manual? Are they even approved to fly the type of aircraft you want them to fly? Did they have a plan of activities filed with the local FSDO? Do you even know what that means? Are they too close to an airport and need another COA? Do they have a pilot's license of the individual that's flying the aircraft that's actually current? Did you do anything in that area? Because if you're just going to hire a person, you are going to set yourself up for a negligent hiring lawsuit. The reason why is many drone companies out there are not complying with the restrictions in their 333 exemptions. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later here about how do we vet them. In addition to common myths people believe about insurance, there are some common myths surrounding the 333s. People say you can't fly near an airport. You can, you just have to have a COA that allows it. Okay, also keep in mind that the distance from the airport is different depending on the type of airport. So you have to look at specifically what airport you're needing to stay away from. Now, if you guys stick around for the next presentation that we will be doing a little bit later on, we're going to talk briefly about the two different types of airports. We're going to be referencing and looking at some maps because there's different distances for different airports. Primarily, it's 5 nautical miles for a towered airport, 3 nautical miles for a non-towered airport, but it has an instrument approach, and 2 nautical miles for the rest of the airports, heliports, glider ports. Now, another myth is that you cannot fly near people. If you are commercial, okay, and you have closed set approval from the FAA, you can fly near people that are considered participating, the actors. Okay, so then we get into the whole fun discussion of what is considered a participating person or not, but that can only be done under a motion picture manual that has already been approved by the FAA. Let's talk about some things you cannot do under 333. Many people talk about what you can do. Let's talk specifically about what you cannot do. Okay, you cannot fly at night, civil twilight, okay, roughly 20 minutes after sunset. You cannot fly within 500 feet unless the FSDO also approves their plan and that the individuals within there are participating or they're protected. And you cannot fly a drone from a moving vehicle. Under your blanket COA now, remember those were under the blanket exemption. I mean, that was under the exemption before, the Section 333 exemption. You remember you also get the second document, the blanket COA. It has restrictions in it too. And in there, you're not going to be able to fly unless you filed a notice a notice to airmen is what it is, and you've waited at least 24 hours. In addition to that, you're limited to 200 feet, and you have to stay 5 nautical miles from an operational towered airport, 3 nautical miles from an airport having a published instrument flight procedure but not having an operational control tower, or fly within 2 nautical miles from an airport, heliport, glider port, or seaplane base. Let's talk briefly about current federal enforcement. Well, this is the breakdown of FAA investigations regarding unlicensed or uncertificated, unauthorized drone pilots here in the U.S. This is from July 2014 to December 2014. There was 14 verbal conversations that happened, 80 letters sent, 105 of the investigations were closed for insufficient information, and 18 of them actually went forward with an enforcement action. Now, of those 18, this is what it broke down into. You had 2 were no actions. The prosecutors didn't go forward. There was 1 that ended up with a letter of correction, 5 with a warning notice sent out to the individual, 9 civil penalties recommended, and 1 pilot license suspension. So remember, in addition to getting fined, if the individual is a licensed pilot, they also stand to have a revocation or a suspension on their pilot's license for violation of the FARs. In addition to these enforcements, you have the real big one that was all over the news, the Skypan case. The individual in that case was flying in New York City and also in Chicago many times. The FAA slapped him with a $1.9 million to make you haul a fine. Now you're going to probably ask, how in the world did he get up to $1.9 million? Well, if you are flying an aircraft in the national airspace, okay, there are all those federal aviation regulations apply. I'll give you a couple real quickly off the top of my head. You have the pilot flying an aircraft that's unregistered, doesn't have an airworthiness certificate, he doesn't have a pilot's license, he's not 1,000 feet above the congested area, right? New York City, Chicago. He's also acting in a careless and reckless manner. So you're having 5 violations right there that he did. If he's being fined as a business, you end up getting about $11,000 per violation. Remember, he just did 5 for one flight. So you're looking at, from takeoff to landing, you got about $55,000 right there. Now, if you put another battery in and took off a second time, yeah, the numbers start going up real quickly there. That's how you can get to $1.9 million really quickly. Now, Skypan, they were fighting it out with the FAA in the Northern District of Illinois, the Federal District Court. The FAA actually subpoenaed Skypan and the client of Skypan. What happened was that the client of Skypan turned over those documents to the FAA, basically, giving a lot of ammo for the FAA to go after Skypan. And also another twist of events is that the FAA is prosecuting Skypan for the actions primarily done between 2011 and up to about 2013. Because because the FAA did award Skypan a 333 exemption in 2015, it, however, does not retroactively apply back to the flights that were all done prior to the 333 exemption. He was charged with violating all these regulations that Skypan, if he had an exemption at the time, would have been exempted from under his Section 333 exemption. Now, in addition to the FAA going after individuals, you also have other federal agencies that have started going after drone operators. You have the NOAA, National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. They sent out a warning letter to a guy on YouTube who took pictures of some whales. Now, those are all protected under a special Marine Mammal Act. You can fly near them, but you're going to need to get permits. More hoops, guys. This guy didn't have hoops. NOAA sent out the warning letter to him. Now, Veterans Affairs, there was a man who was fined for filming a VA hospital. National Park Service, many people remember the Parker case. Well, what was interesting was that he got in trouble with the National Park Service at Grand Canyon National Park for flying his drone there as well. National Park Service issued some memos regarding the taking off and landing of drones in parks, and they specifically prohibit the launching and landing of them in the park. However, they did clarify that if you took off from off park, flew over, and then it landed back off park, then that's fine because they don't control the airspace. They only control the ground, is what they've conceded. The Department of Interior has warned individuals flying in wildlife habitats, and the Federal Fish and Wildlife has confiscated at least a memory card I know of an individual that was filming in a national wildlife refuge. And let's go into current state and local enforcement. So 45 states considered 153 bills related to drones. And since they're not, and in addition to that, there's states out there that do not have any type of drone laws specifically capturing, if you will, these type of these operations. So what police are doing is they are repurposing crimes that are on the books already and going after drone operators and applying these crimes to them. So the ones that I've seen frequently around the United States with individuals that I've talked to who have been arrested for flying their drones is trespassing, noise, and disturbing the peace, and in New York City, their favorite one, careless and reckless behavior. So those are the 3 ones that you see primarily being used against drone operators. And in the city of LA, they passed an ordinance which regulates the flying of drone aircraft within the city limits. Now, what's interesting is that their restrictions on the drones are actually more restrictive than what the FAA says. So the FAA is like, yeah, you can do that, but then the city of LA is like, no, you can't. Well, problem here is that if you don't have proper paperwork, this picture here actually is taken from an individual who was stopped by law enforcement in LA, and they were going around checking his paperwork. And if you see right there at the top, okay, if you are a civilian drone operator and you do not have your blanket COA, then they can arrest you under that law enforcement, under this ordinance. So that's problematic. And if you're a model aircraft, if you fly outside these restrictions, they'll just arrest you. Currently, I know of at least 5 individuals have been cited for this, and 2 of them are currently being prosecuted by the prosecutors in LA. Now, why am I mentioning all of this? This seems kind of a little tangential. Well, proper vetting to find legal drone operators would generally prevent many of the problems in this area from federal, state, and local law enforcement. Generally, law enforcement is trying to find people who are not complying with what the FAA requires. This means that if you hire an individual who is properly vetted and everything's fine and in order with the FAA, you have fewer risks of production delays. If you hire someone who is not properly vetted and they are not operating in accord with what the FAA says, you could be facing some problems from the local FSDO inspectors, the FAA Flight Standards District Office inspectors, or local law enforcement. So here's some tips on vetting drone operators. Why would you want to vet them? Well, to prevent production delays. Another one is to prevent any accidents by hiring quality professional operators. Why wait around and have insurance to prevent an accident when you could hire people on the front end so that are quality, so that the accident does not occur to begin with? And if there is an unfortunate event, there is an accident, you have to set up a good defense against negligent hiring lawsuit. So a personal injury lawyer, they're going to argue that you did not do your due diligence in checking onto a drone operator, that you failed to check the operator's, complying with the FAA says. So you're setting yourself up for the best defense if everything goes south. Here are 3 tips on vetting. Ask for the name of the licensed pilot. Okay, and then you're going to want to run that through the FAA database. I would estimate about 90% of the operators out there do not have a pilot with a pilot license. If they do have a pilot, and then you run them through the background check on the FAA's database, and that it proves to be actually still current, then you're going to want to read line 2 of their exemption to make sure that they are actually approved for closed set filming. Okay, many people are not approved for closed set filming. Once again, you need to look at line 2. It'll say explicitly there, they are or they are not. And the 3rd tip, if they are approved for closed set filming, ask to see their motion picture manual. Check their pilot minimum requirements page and see if there's a page listing their aircraft. Now, the aircraft page is not required, but the pilot minimum requirements page, that's going to be in there. That motion picture manual is actually going to be considered part of the overall exemption approval, and you're going to want to look in there. Why? Because there are individuals who do not really know what they're doing that come into this area that are, if you will, posers. They will find a motion picture manual from other individuals and submit them not knowing what's supposed to be in there. I've actually seen this firsthand where an individual chatted with me, basically fished me for info, filed the motion picture manual, and it was approved. Well, his motion picture manual was for a commercially rated pilot flying a manned helicopter, not a drone. It's like, wow, that guy just set himself up for failure. And if you go through that and see that, you're going to want to know, yeah, I don't really want to deal with this guy because he doesn't know what he's doing. He just copied and pasted this and submitted it to the FAA, not knowing what's going on in there. So once again, that guy's not going to be a quality individual. He's going to cause you problems, which are also going to cause production delays, or in the worst case scenario, an accident. Now, the FAA's proposed commercial drone rules. Are we going to be operating under these 333 exemptions forever? This seems very difficult to comply with. Well, the FAA has some rules that they published back in February of last year, and those regulations are going to go into effect sometime, I would say, in the next 6 months to maybe 3 years. It's kind of all over the place. I checked yesterday on the Department of Transportation's website, and the proposed rules have still not left the FAA to the DOT for review. So we have a pretty good little ways to go, because how it works administratively, regulations are created wise, is that the FAA They then send it to the Department of Transportation for review. They sign off on it. Then the Department of Transportation has to send it over to the Office of Management and Budget. Office of Management and Budget sends it over to the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs. And all these guys have to do all these checks and balance analysis. They have to look at everything, make sure everything's fine within their own internal documents. And you're probably like, why are you telling me all this? It's going to take a while. It's the equivalent of baking a Thanksgiving dinner with a bunch of your in-laws and a bunch of people who have some type of religious dietary restriction or one of those gluten-free people and stuff like that. And then you're going to have everybody all together at once go, that was delicious. That's going to be kind of hard to do. That's the equivalent of what's going on here regulatory-wise. It's going to take a while, but it's coming, guys, and it's going to get better. Let's talk about it. Here's a summary of the important parts of the Notice of Proposed Rulemaking that the FAA that they issued. An unmanned aircraft operator passes a knowledge exam, and this is pretty much the equivalent of the areas of knowledge that a private pilot would have to take. It's going to be a computer-based exam. So you would study the book, you'd go in, you'd take it, similar to if any of you have ever had a ham radio license, you'd pass that, and then you would send that paperwork off that you passed to the FAA. You're going to get a TSA background check, and then you're going to receive in the mail your UAS pilot operator certificate. Now, it's going to have a small UAS rating. Now, that's going to be kind of interesting because I think the reason why they set that up is that the FAA saw that they were going to expand it on above 55 pounds. So small is 55 pounds and below. I'm thinking they're setting this up because they want to bring over some of the unmanned military guys that were flying the Predators and stuff like that, because there's going to be some pretty good applications there for long distance beyond visual line of sight inspection of utility lines with those guys, but there's nothing regulatorily wise created. They're going to need to create something regulatorily wise at some point in the future to bring them over so they have all their hours and they can have a pilot certificate so they can commercially operate. But those guys, they're even farther out than what you guys are looking at. The maximum altitude is 500 feet. Now remember, under the exemption, the maximum altitude was 400 feet, and under the blanket COA, it was 200 feet. Well, here, you don't have that 200, 400 thingy. It's just 500 feet. You're good to go. The aircraft do not need any airworthiness certificates. That's important because in manned aviation world, the aircraft have to be approved by the FAA these beforehand, and then the manufacturer will produce an aircraft, and then you'll obtain a standard airworthiness certificate. So think of like your Cessnas, your Pipers, Boeing, all those guys. Then there's the other type of certificate where it's called the special airworthiness certificates, and after the fact certificate, you got an aircraft. Now, how do we get it certificated? Well, special airworthiness certificate does that. All of that stuff, you don't need to do it with your aircraft. It makes your life so much more easy. Now, you can fly multiple types of airspace under the NPRM's final rules. They were proposing that you could fly in Class Bravo, Charlie, Delta, and Echo airspace with ATC permission. Now, this means that airports are not going to be as much as a problem as they are now. You're going to have to still get ATC permission, but you can at least get in there a whole lot quicker than filing paperwork and waiting a while to actually get something back. Now, Bravo, that's going to be your LAX, Miami International. Charlie is going to be stuff like smaller little regional airports, and the Deltas are even smaller than that. So kind of the best way to, if you ever want to remember a way to I guess conceptualize these different types of airspaces, this is how I used to teach my students when I used to flight instruct. B is for busy, LAX, Miami, right? C is for congested. They tend to hang out on the more outside of Bravos, okay, so in a congested airspace. D for dorky. They tend to try to be like Bravos and Charlies within a tower, but they aren't that busy. And then E for everywhere. And if you want to know what G stands for, Gulf airspace, think of ground. Gulf is always next to the ground. E is everywhere. It makes up a really large majority of U.S. airspace. There is no 500-foot buffer zone that is actually even mentioned anywhere in there. So that whole 500-foot thing with the motion picture manual, that's out the door. That's going to make our life so much easier. And there's also no 24-hour wait period for the NOTAM requirement. That's in the blanket COA. Now, yes, it is all great, but there are things that are not going to be covered under Part 107, the proposed rules, okay, that you're going to need to fall back on the Section 333 exemption to get approvals for those type of operations. Those would be night operations, moving vehicle operations, 500-foot operations, 55-pound and heavier, and 100-mile-an-hour or faster operations. Now, in the future, vetting under Part 107 is actually going to be harder. This is why you might want to start thinking about who you want to hire now, because the people who are above board now, it's easy to determine who those individuals are as opposed to later on, because what's going to happen is everyone's going to go take their computer-based exam, pass it, and everybody looks just alike. You can't find out if they have a pilot's license or not, if they're legit, because there's none of these like little tips that I told you about that are going to apply in the future. Everyone's going to have a drone operator certificate. And you might want to think about in the future about hiring operators maybe from some type of special flight school so that you have a third-party independent check on them, so that in addition to the FAA signing off on them giving a pilot certificate, there was a flight instructor of some sort that went and checked them out. Because now, this is another interesting point. With manned aviation, you always were trained under a flight instructor. He prepped you, and then you took a check ride with an examiner, and that's how you obtained your pilot certificate. Under this Part 107 setup, it's broken that mold. You have an individual just picking up a book, no flight instructor involved whatsoever, taking a computer-based exam. So the natural checks that were in place from flight instructors and examiners who tended to get rid of problematic students, because if I had a student that was not as competent as I would hope for or didn't take it seriously, yeah, I just wouldn't sign them off. There was natural gatekeeping functions that were in place with manned aviation, while there won't be that coming up here. So you might want to fall back onto some type of flight instructing setup, sending them to approved schools, and then those guys sign off and do that type of vetting, if you will, for you. Now, what do I do? If anybody's interested, I do Section 333 exemptions for closed set and groundbreaking type of approvals like night, moving vehicle, 55-pound and heavier operations. I do near airport certificate of authorizations or waivers. I can help you with vetting of drone operators or setting up drone operating vetting programs. Or if you just generally have questions, can I do X, with my drone, or can my operator that I'm hiring to fly on set do, such and such with my drone? So, do we have any questions?
Okay, Jonathan, we've got a question. What are the requirements for filming an RC airplane flown as a prop?
Oh yeah, see, that's a great question. I had a client with that problem actually. You can fly them on set just like you would under your like you would regularly, because you're gonna have to have two pilots, okay? Because you're operating under 323 exemption. Pilot of the prop drone is gonna need to be kosher under the 323, and then the guy filming the other one is also going to need to be in compliance with the 333. But that's fine. You would just treat them both, the prop and whoever's around it, like actors, and it's just like flying multiple drones under your 333 exemption. If you wanted to have like different angle scenes and stuff like that, it's the same setup. That's completely allowable.
And then we have a question for, do we have a pre-hazard presentation you can send us? We are going to have that available on our website, but it'll be soon, but probably give us a little time to just get it finalized and get it up there, but we will definitely have that available. Okay, and then have another question. Why do we need a motion picture manual when the data collection guides do not?
It goes specifically back to 91-119. Remember the whole picture I showed you way back here? Is that this regulation on the far left there, applied in sparsely populated areas or even in rural areas or congested areas, you're going to have a hard time complying with it, okay? The individuals doing aerial data collection, they're not going to be flying in those areas because it's going to be too congested with too many people and stuff. They can't get that operations. The motion picture manual is set up primarily to set up standards. Okay, so you're going to show up to the scene, you're going to brief everybody involved. Hey, this is what we're doing, this is where we're flying, this is what's happening. In worst case scenario, this is emergency, this is how we're going to handle all that. It's designed to be set up so that individuals that are within 500 feet are consenting and being fully knowledgeable at what's actually going down. This isn't where you put a sign up on the sidewalk and it says, okay, warning, if you come past this sign here, then you are fully consenting to close-set cinematography. Not going to work. They have to be consenting as well as knowing what's going on. Furthermore, if some people also come up with the idea of putting a waiver of some sort on the back of a ticket stub and showing up at events and stuff like that, that's not going to work as well, because how many people actually read the back of tickets? I mean, come on, really. When did anybody ever read the back of a ticket? It just goes into the garbage or in your pocket. That's not really knowing and about what's going on and consenting. So it's designed to be standardized. It's going to be repeatable. You're not going to miss anything you need to talk about, because there's actually the Motion Picture Manual. It's a standardized manual that was developed between the Motion Picture Association in America and the FAA. There are certain minimum requirements that need to be in there that when the FAA checks it, they will check for those things. So that's important, because when you go and vet the Motion Picture Manual, you can quickly go through and see if who's the approved pilots, what are the approved aircraft, what type of minimum requirements the pilot is supposed to have. It's going to be important for also when you're vetting individuals as well. So it goes back to, it's a waiver from that regulation. The way to get around it is with this previously standardized manual that was already come up with, not you and your buddies with a checklist that you typed up on Word saying, hey, let's check around for this or that. It's standardized. That's how the FAA can let you out around the 500-foot restriction. I'm being a little long-winded on it, but I want to make sure I emphasize this point that this is a standardized thing. You just can't make it up and file for it.
Okay, we got another question. What about collecting stock imagery using UAVs from multiple pilots? Will I need to have every stock image documented with the pilot name, license, and time shot was taken? Seems very intrusive until the general regulations are released.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the taking aerial photography, the pictures there, is not against the federal aviation regulations. You flying a drone without a pilot's license, with closer than 500 feet, all these other restrictions that are in your, the regulations that are in your exemption that you're normally exempted from, those are what you'd be violating. Okay, so taking the pictures, the FAA is never going to cite you for that. However, that's perfect evidence for cluing the FAA into maybe coming after you, right? Hey, it looks like you got some footage there over a roadway near a bunch of people in the public. Looks like you busted 91-119 unless all those people were actors. So you don't need to put that stuff on your photography, but you could, if you want to, just to kind of nip it in the bud before it gets problematic. This footage was taken according to, Section 323 exemption and all full compliance, blah, blah, blah. You could do that, but you don't have to. You could just put up a straight up picture.
All right, and the next question is, will there be an exemption for operating for moving vehicles?
Hopefully at some point here in the near future, yes. I'm currently working on that right now. It's still being pioneered. I mean, this whole thing is, the ball didn't get rolling until about 1.5 years ago, so this is groundbreaking. Currently, outside of aerial data collection and closed set, there have been exemptions approved for flight instruction, okay, for the general public, not for training your own individuals, but for flight instruction of general public. Also for 55-pound and heavier type of operations, that has been approved. Crop dusting has been approved. And then there was the Cape production setup, which was a modified type of closed set filming for an athletic event.
All right, and then we've got, can a business use a recreational flyer to take video if it is not really for commercial use? As an example, let's say a company just wanted to show sunny weather in Palm Beach on their Instagram page just for fun, not as an advertisement.
Well, what's the point of the picture? Direct or indirect benefit. That's pretty much the FAA's test for this whole area, is that commercial activity would be an individual or business flying for direct or indirect benefit. Now, what's also interesting is that individuals that are flying for nonprofits as well would be brought into this, because the federal aviation regulations apply to all unmanned aircraft. The FAA exercises their discretion in not enforcing the regulations towards recreational individuals, and those would be individuals who are purely flying for fun, individuals, not businesses of any sort, flying for fun. They won't go after them and apply all the federal aviation regulations. But if you're not in that bubble, okay, the protection, if you're a nonprofit or an individual making or business doing any type of indirect or direct benefit, then you're going to have to comply with all of these regulations. So the FAA is going to most definitely consider, what's the point of the picture? It's indirect benefit of some sort. Hey, so you have a cool Instagram account, so people show up, so they start paying attention, so maybe you get some business from it. That's going to be seen as a commercial flight under the FAA's interpretation. Anybody wants more information on that, you look up the 2014 model aircraft interpretation, where they went into all this and explicitly kind of flushed it out. So realtors, because going way back into the history of all this, back in 2007, the FAA published a notice saying that if you were going to be flying for a commercial benefit, you're going to have to obtain a special airworthiness certificate or not. Well, 2012 came out. We had the Section 333 started happening. That was at least a possibility. It hadn't really fully started happening until 2014. Early 2014, the FAA fixed the loophole in the 2007 interpretation document. What do you mean by the loophole? Well, individuals were flying the flight for free. Okay, so I go out and I film the picture of whatever for free, but then I charge a crazy amount of money on the back end doing the editing of the footage and stuff like that. So you were getting your money. You're just getting it from a different source. But the FAA said that's an indirect benefit when you that's commercial operation, and if you're flying using a drone to furtherance of your business. So they gave 2 examples where a farmer was flying a drone to increase the overall crop yield. He's flying the flight for free, right? But he's going to get his money from the selling more crop, or a realtor who's not flying for that particular flight, but it's making his drone his listing with the drone photography far more people are going to watch that. It's far more you can get higher prices and stuff like that. That's going to be benefiting him. So it's direct or indirect benefit.
Okay, we've got a question. I'm a professional cameraman. What if I'm flying a drone and using a GoPro camera for personal use? How would I prove that or deal with law enforcement on that? The images would go no farther than my own computer.
Oh, well, if you're flying recreationally, you're going to want to fly under the FAA's guidance documents, 91 Advisory Circular 9157A, and also look at the Part 47 and Part 48 registration process. Also look into the 2014 Model Aircraft Interpretation Rule, and they list out a bunch of restrictions in there of what you can and cannot do. Actually, in the back of the book that I published, I created a giant table listing all the do's and do nots of recreational flying, because the FAA has not been completely consistent on what applies and what does not apply everywhere, because once again, drones are aircraft, all the regulations apply. FAA turns their blind eye to certain regulations going, yeah, but we're not going to apply this one, but we're going to apply this one, and oh, we forgot about that one, and never mind this one. Oh, wait, it's back on the table. So it changes over time. It's a little bit of a hit, hitting a moving target. But 9157A, look at Part 47 and Part 48, the registration rules. If you're flying a drone that is over 55 pounds outside in the national airspace, then the FAA says that you must register that aircraft prior to actually operating. Now, keep in mind that if you are going to go the registration route and register your aircraft recreationally or commercially, I would suggest everyone do the Part 47 paper-based route. The reason why is the FAA created the Part 48 registration regulations too quickly. They did it illegally and contrary to what Congress said under 2 acts. and they're currently being sued right now in the District Court of Appeals for the DC Circuit. I'm actually one of the attorneys involved in one of those cases, and we stand a pretty good chance to win, which means the Part 48 registration process will get shut down, and you're going to have to re-register again. Save yourself the trouble. Go the Part 47 route.
Okay, so next question. What's the penalty for a non-licensed pilot shooting video that they use commercially? For example, a kid shoots video and a realtor uses the shot to market houses in a neighborhood.
Good question. So FAA is going to find out about who is actually shooting the shot, because generally how a lot of this goes down is the competitors tend to rat each other out to the FAA anonymously. Like the Skypan case, 2 anonymous phone calls came in ratting out Skypan to the FSDO, the FAA Flight Standards District Office. They started investigating the flights, and then that's when they subpoenaed the client of Skypan. Well, the FAA could subpoena the realtor. They're going to track it back to the individual for each of those flights. Now, the YouTube videos are going to be used as evidence against you. It's not conclusive enough, because the video could have been taken with a 333 operator or not, but they're going to start asking questions. Hey, did you have a 333? There's a pilot license. They're going to start fishing around. And then for each regulation that you are violating, as an individual, you can be charged with $1,100 fine for that one violation. And if you're a business getting charged, it's $11,000 per violation. Remember, you can have multiple violations going on at the same time. Similar to like a criminal who's going to be like robbing a bank and killing somebody, you can charge it with multiple crimes at the same time. It's the same thing there. Certain regulations also, the enabling statutes that were passed by Congress, allow also for the criminal prosecution, so you could get fined civilly. And if they really wanted to, if they wanted to make an example of you, they could come after you criminally. Specifically, the whole registration requirement. If you do not register your aircraft prior to flying outside, you can be punished up to 3 years in federal prison and or a $250,000 fine on top of your other fines. Now, will they do that? Maybe not, but they have the capability.
All right, thank you. Next question is, does each waiver have its own specific motion picture manual, and how do we acquire the manual?
Yes, each exemption is going to have its own, there's going to be different names in there, different aircraft, so they're going to be somewhat tailored to each of the individuals. If you are wanting more info about that, I would suggest emailing me. I can put you in contact with the individual who actually does all of the motion picture manuals and other aircraft flight manuals for my clients. I only deal with one individual. He is a commercially rated pilot, and actually he's been in the RC industry for decades, so just contact me regarding that and I can put you in contact with him.
Great. And then this is the last question that we have. Oh, nope, just got another one. Well, so what kind of licenses are needed when looking to train organizations like police and fire?
Oh, see, that is a great question. Okay, so yeah, because the agency, okay, backing it up again, drones are aircraft, therefore all the federal aviation regulations apply, right? You guys have heard this a million times. Well, if depending on what type of operator you are, you can actually have only certain regulations apply. So if you are considered a public aircraft operator, and that's based upon the federal statutes that were passed back in, I forgot, decades ago, if you fall into that specific category, then not all the regulations apply. One of them specifically is the pilot license requirement. So firefighter or police guys, they don't have to have a pilot's license requirement. They actually self-certify themselves and determine their own standards. It's the same thing for like the military. You know, the FAA is not going to get into the business of determining what's the standard of competence for a F-16 fighter pilot. You guys do what you need to do. We're going to kind of be hands off, but you're going to have to come up with some standards, because if you don't, then you're going to be seen as careless and reckless, and the FAA could come after you for that. Now, to fall in the special protected, I guess you would say, public aircraft status bubble, is that the aircraft has only a couple ways to be owned and leased. Now, if one situation you could do is where the aircraft is purely owned by the entity, the agency, like the fire department, and then they could subcontract individuals to fly as for doing crew resource training, and you could do it that way. So you don't get a 333 exemption. They get a public COA, certificate of authorization or waiver, because remember, a waiver, they got regulations they need waiving too as well, because they can't comply with them all because they're burdensome. You can actually fly under theirs for purposes of crew training. Now, there are restrictions there, and so some individuals are wanting to just go and get their Section 333 exemption and then train those firefighters. Let's say they don't have a public COA to operate under, so then you, if you will, have to stand on your own 2 feet. Somebody has to be authorized somewhere. Either you're flying under their authorization or you gotta have your own authorization. In that situation, if you are doing flight instructing under your own 333, to date there has been only 1 exemption that has been approved for flight instruction, and there are currently 4 more pending. Those happen to be mine. If you need help with that, contact me. But currently, nobody is allowed to do public flight instruction, not in the sense of public aircraft operations with the government, but open flight instructing services up out to the public commercially. You can train your own guys in-house. That's allowed under your exemption, so you can be proficient, so you can get new pilots in. That's perfectly fine. But going and starting a hobby shop type of thing where guys come in, that's not allowed under the Section 333 exemptions, and you would be in violation of your 333 exemption if you were to do so. It's going to get better, but currently it's not that great. If you need help with that, contact me.
Okay, and last question. Is there a place to see a sample of these waivers?
With the motion, okay. The exemptions, there are many exemptions online. And remember, those are also different from the blanket COA. Okay, they have different restrictions. Those are online. Specifically, the exemptions are. The blanket COAs, I've seen nobody have those online. Those are only given out privately to the individuals who actually petition for them, and they don't make those available to the public. But it's pretty much generalized, standardized format. I put most of the info that was really pertinent into this in this slide. If you are going to go out and start researching that area, I would highly suggest it's the equivalent of like cheating on an exam. You're only as good as the person you're copying off of. So if you're looking into, studying some of these areas out, there are many individuals who are preparing paperwork for individuals and filing those exemptions, and they're not really that competent whatsoever. And so they actually ask for regulations that do not even apply, that have been answered by the FAA over about a year and a half ago, that they don't even apply. So if you read somebody's asking for, like, let's say Part 45, for instance, or a few other ones, you can clue in real quickly that they have no clue what they're doing. They're just copying and pasting some people's work and filing it, and that's problematic. But there are places online you can look into that. If you want to go to the FAA's website, there are some exemptions on there listed. But you also want to think about this. Are you doing this from a just trying to get a piece of paper, or you wanting to be compliant? Because this area is very similar to doing your taxes. Yes, you can do your taxes, but like we all know, it always takes like 2 or 3 weekends, right? They eat them up. Or if you pay someone that's a professional that does this all the time, you can rapidly get it cranked out and get your answers really quickly without going, hold on, I need to jump on some Facebook forum and look up some answers. And then once again, you're only good as the people you're asking questions from, and they might be completely wrong, but you don't know, they don't know, and there's lots of blind leading the blind. So you can go online and do it yourself, but that's taxes. What's it worth it to you?
Okay, the last question we're going to take, because then we're going to conclude this part and move on to the next. But question is, what about commercial operations for film in an enclosed area, say with a green screen in a covered studio?
Great question. If it's indoors, that is not the national airspace. Okay, so the FAA does not have jurisdiction over operations inside a building. Okay, so you don't have to worry about this if it's purely indoors. So that brings up some interesting questions there, because if you're going to operate indoors, the individual that's going to be flying, he's going to have to be pretty competent with being able to fly without a GPS, because many of these individuals that are flying with GPS, it does tend to stabilize the aircraft, but if you're flying indoors, you're not going to have that ability to hold that specific position. So you're going to want to vet some people because of that. You're not going to get any GPS signal inside.
Okay. So that concludes our section on the film and television industry. And Jonathan, why don't we just jump into the music and touring? So anyone would like to stick around with us for the second section, we'll just start that now.